Hello everyone, and welcome back to Creepy Mr. Night. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it'd be fun for everyone to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. Story 1. The Body in the Well. The sun was setting over Miller's Creek, casting long shadows across the sleepy town. Miller's Creek was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone, and where nothing truly unexpected ever happened, at least not for the past several decades. The town's cobblestone streets had a timeless feel, as if the town itself had remained frozen in the 1950s. No one ever dared to speak about the past, the darker chapters of Miller's Creek's history that had been buried deep in the town's collective memory. Jesse Owens was the first to break that unspoken rule. As the town's maintenance worker, he had the rather dull task of maintaining public spaces, parks, and the many forgotten relics of the past. He had been assigned to clean up the woods surrounding an old unused well on the outskirts of town, an area no one bothered with anymore. The well itself was as old as the town itself, deep and weathered by time. On this particular afternoon, as Jesse cleared away the overgrown weeds and thick vines, he felt a sudden chill in the air. He brushed it off as just a cold wind, but then, through the overgrown bushes, something caught his eye. A strange, dark shape. It was almost as though something or someone was hidden just beneath the earth's surface. Heart racing, Jesse walked closer, pushing aside branches that blocked his path. His eyes widened in shock when he realized what it was. A body. He froze for a moment, his mind not able to process the reality of what he was seeing. A man, probably in his late 30s, lay partially hidden in the shallow water at the bottom of the well. His face was pale, his clothes torn and stained, and in his hand, tightly gripped, was an old leather-bound diary. Jesse's heart pounded in his chest. He pulled out his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "I think I've found something bad," he said, his voice trembling. Detective Sarah Wallace arrived at the scene just as the sun dipped below the horizon. She had been in law enforcement for over 15 years, and yet the sight of the body in the well unsettled her. There was something off about it, something that didn't sit right. She had seen countless murder victims in her career, but something about the way the body was positioned, partially submerged in water, sent a shiver down her spine. The body was already being lifted by the coroner's team, and Sarah stood by, watching intently. The area around the well was eerily quiet, with the only sounds being the rustling of the trees in the wind. "Who is he?" Sarah asked, turning to the local sheriff, Calvin Harris, who stood nearby, looking grim. "We don't know yet," Calvin replied. "We haven't identified him. No ID, no phone, nothing that gives us a clue as to who he might be." Sarah glanced over at the body. It was clear this wasn't a simple accident. There were signs of trauma, bruising around the neck, a deep gash along the side of his head. But what truly caught Sarah's attention was the small leather-bound diary the man had been clutching. She knelt down beside it and carefully picked it up. The diary's pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. She opened to the first page and began to read. Day 1. It's been 3 weeks since I last saw her. I thought I was imagining things, but now I know. Someone's been watching me. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like I'm being followed. Her heart skipped a beat. It was familiar. The handwriting looked like that of Lily Turner, the local school teacher who had gone missing 6 months earlier. Lily had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and empty hopes for answers. Now, it seemed, the diary was providing those answers. But to what end? Sarah closed the diary with a soft thud and stood up. There were too many questions, and she wasn't going to stop until she found the answers. The entire town of Millers Creek had been shocked when Lily Turner disappeared. She had been a beloved figure in the community, a school teacher who had taught at the local elementary school for nearly a decade. She was kind, well-respected, and trusted by everyone. It was hard to imagine anyone wanting to harm her. Lily's disappearance had been the subject of multiple investigations. The town had rallied together, searching the woods, the fields, and every corner of the town in hopes of finding any sign of her. But as the weeks passed, hope began to fade, and eventually, the case was closed due to lack of evidence. However, the discovery of the body in the well had changed everything. This wasn't just a random victim. Sarah was now certain of it. The man in the well was connected to Lily Turner's case. The diary she had found was the key. But the question was, who was the man? And why had he been holding Lily's diary? Sarah knew she had to dig deeper into the people who had been closest to Lily. She began by visiting her family, hoping to find out more about her last days, to understand the paranoia that had seeped into Lily's writing. Lily's parents, Roger and Carol Turner, were devastated by the loss of their daughter. They hadn't spoken to anyone outside of close family members in months, preferring to stay away from the public eye. The grief was still fresh, and Sarah knew the pain was unimaginable for them. "I don't know who could have done this," Carol sobbed when Sarah asked about Lily's final days. She was always so careful, so cautious. She never mentioned anything unusual. She was scared, yes, but she never said who. She just kept saying someone was following her, but we thought it was just stress. Her job. It was so demanding. We didn't think it was anything serious. Roger, her father, sat quietly in the corner, his hands trembling. She started staying up late, writing in that damn journal. She was obsessed. And then one night she just disappeared. No note, no warning. It's like she vanished into thin air. The diary was clearly more important than anyone had realized. It was more than just a record of her last days. It was a document of her fears, and perhaps of a growing realization that she wasn't going to make it out alive. But it wasn't just her family Sarah needed to question. The people who worked with Lily, her colleagues, and the people who had seen her around town in her final days were all potential leads. Sarah's next step was to visit the local diner. It was a place where everyone gathered, and it was a hub of gossip and rumors. There, she found a former student of Lily's, Emily Harris, who was now in her 20s and working as a waitress. Emily had always been close to Lily, and Sarah thought she might know something useful. "I remember her last days so clearly," Emily said, wiping down the counter. "She wasn't the same, you know. She used to be so cheerful. But the last few weeks, she was different. She was looking over her shoulder constantly, as if someone was behind her. She would get these blank stares, like she was waiting for something." "Did she ever mention who was following her?" Sarah pressed, trying to keep the conversation casual. Emily hesitated for a moment, looking over her shoulder. "There was this guy, I think. He came around a few times, always asking about her. At first I thought he was just some guy trying to get a date, you know. But there was something off about him. He was intense, almost obsessive. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But now..." "Do you remember his name?" Emily shook her head. "Number." "He was always so quiet. Never gave his name. Just asked about her, where she'd been, if she was seeing anyone. That kind of thing. But after she disappeared, I never saw him again." The pieces were starting to fit together. There was someone from the town, who had been keeping tabs on Lily. But who? As Sarah delved further into the investigation, she discovered a chilling pattern. The man in the well, who was still unidentified, had been in town recently, He had been spotted by several residents, always lingering around the places where Lily had worked, walked, and lived. His obsession with her had become too obvious to ignore. Through a combination of witness testimony and phone records, Sarah finally managed to uncover the man's identity: John Miller, a local who had once been a classmate of Lily's. He had returned to town recently, under an alias. It became clear that John had been fixated on Lily for years. His obsession had grown so intense that in the end, it had consumed him completely. He was the one who had been following her. He was the one who had stalked her into madness, and ultimately, he was the one who had killed her. John Miller's name sent an icy ripple through Sarah's mind. She had heard the name before, but she hadn't given it much thought. John Miller was a quiet man, someone who had never stood out in the town. He had disappeared from Miller's Creek years ago, shortly after high school. Some people said he had gone off to find work in a big city. Others said he had left because of personal issues, whatever those were. Now, though, his reappearance made sense in a way that sent chills down her spine. The man who had been stalking Lily, the one who had sent her spiraling into paranoia, was the very same person who had been found dead in the well. Sarah's mind raced as she recalled Emily's words, the waitress from the diner, who had spoken about a man who had been obsessively asking about Lily. It was all starting to click into place. The diary in the dead man's hand, the strange behavior, the paranoia that Lily had written about. Everything pointed to John Miller. But the question remained, why? Why had John Miller come back to Miller's Creek? What had driven him to kill Lily? Sarah wasn't sure yet, but she knew she had to find out. There were still too many gaps in the story, too many unanswered questions. She needed to know what had happened between Lily and John. What had caused their relationship to deteriorate? As Sarah sifted through old yearbooks and town records, she found something unsettling. John Miller had been close to Lily once, many years ago. In high school, they had been inseparable. Friends, possibly more. The yearbook pictures showed them together, laughing and carefree, but something had happened after graduation. John had vanished, and Lily's life had taken a completely different turn. According to her family, Lily had started dating a man shortly after high school, a man named Ethan Harper. Ethan had been a part of her life for years, and many people had assumed that he would be the one to eventually marry her. But then, just as quickly as he entered her life, he disappeared as well. Some said it was a mutual breakup, but others speculated that Ethan had been hiding something dark. Sarah thought back to the conversation with Lily's parents. Carol Turner had mentioned Ethan in passing, saying that Lily had become increasingly distant in the months before her disappearance, often becoming lost in her thoughts. Could it be that Lily's growing fear and anxiety had started long before John Miller resurfaced? But the most pressing question now was, why had John returned? What was his connection to Lily's disappearance? After a sleepless night of research, Sarah decided to pay a visit to the town's old cemetery. It wasn't far from where the well had been found, and it had always been a place that seemed to hold secrets. The cemetery was old, centuries old, and it had a strange, almost eerie feeling to it, like the past was buried there, whispering to anyone who cared to listen. Sarah walked slowly through the rows of gravestones, searching for any connection to John Miller. She was looking for something, anything, that might give her a clue. Then she found it. A weathered headstone that read, Ethan Harper, beloved son, lost to time, 1984 to 2004. Sarah knelt down to read the inscription more closely. Ethan Harper had died 10 years ago, but the death had never been discussed publicly. There had been no funeral, no obituaries, nothing. The town had simply moved on. But why? Sarah felt a sudden coldness wrap around her as she stared at the stone. Something about it felt wrong. The official records had claimed Ethan had died in a car accident, but there had been no details, no witnesses, no investigation, and what was more, the dates on the stone were odd. Ethan Harper had died just a few months before Lily had vanished. Had he been connected to her disappearance in some way? Or had someone made sure that his death remained a mystery? Sarah decided to visit Lily's old school, hoping to uncover more about Ethan and John's relationships with her. The building was still in use, though it had been modernized over the years. She managed to track down a few of Lily's former students, who were now grown adults, but the answers she received were cryptic at best. "I remember Ethan," said one of the former students, a man in his 30s now, his face weathered with age. "He was always around the school, and I think he and Lily were close, but I didn't know him well. What I do know is that he didn't leave on good terms. People used to say that he had a temper." Sarah pressed him for more, but the man's eyes darted nervously. He seemed to know something but wasn't willing to share it. Frustrated, Sarah left the school, realizing that her leads were growing more tangled by the minute. Just as she was about to leave the parking lot, she received a call from Calvin Harris, the local sheriff. His voice was strained, and Sarah could sense the urgency. "Detective Wallace," Calvin said, "you need to come to the station. We've got something on the body in the well, something that might change everything." Back at the sheriff's office, Sarah was introduced to Officer Thompson, a young officer who had been reviewing the autopsy report for the man found in the well. Thompson handed her a file with several photos and lab results. "There's something strange about the victim, Detective," Thompson said. "We found traces of hair under his fingernails. Human hair, but it wasn't his. It was a woman's hair." Sarah's mind raced. Could it be Lily's? "We're running DNA tests now," Thompson replied. "But it's a lead, nonetheless. And there's more. The victim's fingerprints are a match for John Miller." It hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. John Miller wasn't just a random stranger. He had a history with Lily. He had been in her life for years. But why had he been the one to die in the well? And what did the woman's hair under his nails mean? The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but the final answer remained just out of reach. The DNA results confirmed what Sarah had feared. The hair belonged to Lily Turner. John Miller had killed her. But why? Had he killed her out of obsession? Or had there been something more to the story? Sarah's mind raced, trying to put together the final pieces. She returned to the cemetery, standing once again by Ethan Harper's grave. The pieces clicked into place. Ethan hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered, and John Miller had been the one to do it. But Lily had known the truth, and she had started to investigate on her own. She had been on the verge of uncovering the truth when John, desperate to silence her, had killed her. It was clear now. John Miller had been covering up his dark secret. He had murdered Ethan Harper years ago, and when Lily got too close to the truth, he had killed her too. The body in the well had been his final attempt to bury the past once and for all. The truth had been revealed, but there was one last thing Sarah needed to do. She returned to the well, standing at its edge, staring down into the dark water. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her chest. "John Miller is dead," she said softly to herself, "but his legacy won't be forgotten." It was then that she heard a voice behind her. "It's not over." Sarah spun around. Calvin Harris stood there, his face grim. "What do you mean, Calvin?" she asked. "John wasn't acting alone," Calvin said. "There's someone else behind all of this. Someone who helped him, someone who doesn't want the truth to come out." The final twist came when Sarah uncovered an unexpected truth. Calvin Harris himself had been involved in the cover-up. He had helped John Miller and had been complicit in hiding the murder of Ethan Harper. The sheriff's office, in its desire to protect the town's reputation, had allowed the story to remain buried for years. In a final confrontation, Sarah confronted Calvin, and he confessed to everything. The town's darkest secrets had finally been exposed. Miller's Creek would never be the same again. The truth had been uncovered, but at a great cost. Sarah had brought justice to Lily Turner, Ethan Harper, and even John Miller. But as she left the town behind, she knew that Miller's Creek's dark past would continue to haunt its residents for generations to come. The morning after her confrontation with Calvin Harris, Sarah stood outside the sheriff's office, a heavy silence hanging in the air. The town of Miller's Creek was waking up as usual, oblivious to the truth that had begun to unravel beneath its seemingly peaceful facade. But for Sarah, nothing about the town was the same anymore. Every corner of it now felt charged with dark energy, with every smile hiding a secret. The truth about Calvin's involvement with John Miller had shaken her to the core. The sheriff, a man who had been a trusted authority figure for years, was complicit in hiding the murders. He had helped cover up Ethan Harper's death, allowing the town to believe that Lily Turner had simply vanished without explanation. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Calvin had known more than he had let on from the very beginning. He had been protecting someone, and that someone had gone to great lengths to bury the truth. Calvin didn't act alone, Sarah whispered to herself, staring at the empty streets. She knew there were still loose ends, pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. The name that lingered in her mind was Ethan Harper. His death had been the catalyst for everything that had happened, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized something didn't add up. Calvin's confession didn't sit right. It was almost as if he was trying to divert attention away from the real orchestrator of the crimes. She needed to go back to the root of it all, back to Ethan. She was starting to believe that Ethan's death was not just a random act, but something orchestrated by someone with a very specific agenda. Someone who had been in the shadows, pulling strings all along. Determined to uncover the full story behind Ethan Harper's death and John Miller's involvement, Sarah decided to return to the town's local library. It was an odd decision, but something told her that old records might hold the answers she needed. The librarian, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, was a quiet woman in her late 60s who had been working at the library for decades. She had seen the town evolve, but always from a distance. Sarah hoped that Eleanor might have insights that others didn't. When Sarah arrived, Eleanor was sitting behind the counter, reading a book. She looked up and smiled politely when Sarah approached. "Detective Wallace, what brings you in today?" she asked. "I'm looking for something," Sarah said. "A record of Ethan Harper." The file contained news clippings and police reports, all recounting the car accident that had claimed Ethan Harper's life. The official story was as follows. Ethan had lost control of his car late one night on a back road. The car had collided with a tree, and Ethan had been killed instantly. But as Sarah flipped through the records, she found something unsettling. There were no photographs of the crash, no eyewitnesses, no official report detailing the investigation. Just an anonymous police report with little to no information about the accident. It was as if the town had tried to forget about Ethan's death. But what truly caught Sarah's attention was a single piece of paper wedged between two pages. It was a handwritten note, and it read, "It wasn't an accident. We did it because he knew too much. They'll never figure it out." Her heart skipped a beat. This was a confession, a chilling admission that Ethan's death was no accident. But who had written it? And what had Ethan known that was so dangerous? As Sarah left the library, her mind was racing. The note she had found was damning. Ethan had known something so dark that whoever was behind his death felt it was necessary to silence him. Sarah's thoughts turned back to Calvin Harris. He had admitted to being involved in the cover-up, but he had never mentioned who else had been part of it. Who else could have been behind the murder of Ethan Harper? The answer was becoming clearer with each passing day. The people of Miller's Creek had been living a lie that someone was desperate to keep buried. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to that note. They'll never figure it out. Who were they? Who had Ethan been trying to expose before his death? Was it possible that the town's quiet facade was hiding even more secrets than she had imagined? Suddenly, a realization hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. What if the "they" in the note referred not to the police, but to someone within the town itself? Someone who had the power to keep the town's past hidden. She knew she had to visit the town's oldest residents, people who had been around for decades, who had seen things long before Sarah had arrived. They might know more than they let on. The following day, Sarah made her way to the home of Mr. Daniel Brooks, one of the oldest and most reclusive residents of Miller's Creek. He had lived in the town all his life, and his memory was sharp despite his advanced age. Sarah had heard that Daniel was one of the few people who had witnessed the early days of the town's history, and his knowledge might hold the key to understanding what had happened to Ethan Harper. Daniel's house was a small, weathered cottage at the edge of town, its front yard overgrown with weeds. When Sarah knocked on the door, an old man with a thick gray beard answered. His eyes were sharp and alert, despite his hunched posture. "Detective Wallace," Daniel said, his voice gravelly. "What brings you to my neck of the woods?" "I need your help, Mr. Brooks," Sarah replied. "I'm investigating the death of Ethan Harper. I believe it was no accident. Do you remember anything about him?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, and he motioned for Sarah to come inside. "You're asking about Ethan, huh? I remember that boy. He had a lot of questions, too many questions." "Questions about what?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. Daniel hesitated, then nodded as though making a decision. "About the town. About some things people don't like to talk about. The kind of things that get people hurt." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "Things that happened a long time ago," Daniel murmured. "Things that have been buried for generations. Things that even the sheriff doesn't want to dig up." It was as if a veil had been lifted. The pieces were falling into place. Miller's Creek had a history, one of secrets, violence, and dark deeds that had never been spoken about. Ethan Harper had been the one to start asking the right questions, and for that, he had paid the ultimate price. As Sarah pieced together the town's forgotten past, she uncovered a chilling story of corruption and violence that had been passed down through the generations. Miller's Creek had once been a thriving town, but its prosperity had come at a dark cost. A secret society of influential families, including Calvin Harris's ancestors, had been responsible for numerous illegal activities, including land theft, extortion, and even murder. Ethan Harper had stumbled upon the truth, and when he began to ask too many questions, the society had decided to silence him. The murder of Ethan Harper had been the beginning of a long cover-up, a cover-up that had extended to the death of Lily Turner and the manipulation of everyone in the town. Sarah knew now that the web of deceit ran deeper than anyone had realized, and to uncover the full truth, she would need to confront the very people who had spent decades hiding it. The final confrontation came when Sarah confronted the town's oldest and most powerful families, those who had been the architects of Miller's Creek's dark past. As she revealed the truth to the people who had once protected the town's secrets, she realized that the power of these families was far-reaching, but it was not invincible. In a dramatic showdown, Sarah exposed the truth to the world, unmasking the lies, the corruption, and the bloodshed that had been hidden for far too long. And as the town of Miller's Creek faced the consequences of its actions, Sarah knew that despite the darkness, justice had been served. Miller's Creek would never be the same. The truth had been exposed, and with it, the town's darkest secrets had come to light. But for Sarah Wallace, It was more than just a victory. It was a reminder that even the smallest towns hold the biggest secrets. And sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that are buried the deepest. With the case finally closed, Sarah left Miller's Creek behind, knowing that her work here was done. But the echoes of the past would always remain. The days following Sarah's confrontation with the town's hidden elite were heavy. Though she had exposed the truth, there was still a gnawing sense that something remained unresolved. She had brought justice to Lily Turner, Ethan Harper, and John Miller. But now, she was left with the lingering questions. Why had it taken so long for the truth to come out? And why had Calvin Harris and the others decided to go to such great lengths to bury the past? The town of Miller's Creek had been forced to reckon with its past. But the people, those who had known what had happened and who had allowed it to continue for so many years, still walked freely in the streets. For them, the price of their silence was their unshakable sense of power. And as Sarah walked through the town now, she saw that same air of invincibility still lingering in the eyes of some residents. But there was more. There were still loose ends to tie up. As Sarah turned the pages of her notes, she found herself revisiting old records and files she had previously glanced over. Something was nagging her about a few of the smaller details she had overlooked in her haste to solve the bigger mystery. One document stood out, a letter, unsigned but dated 6 months before Lily's disappearance. The letter was sent to an unknown recipient, but the message was clear. The time is almost here. They will never understand what we did, but the price we paid is more than any of them will ever realize. The cryptic message made Sarah uneasy. Had someone else been involved in the cover-up? Someone whose hand was still visible, but whose presence had never been fully acknowledged? Sarah had already uncovered the deaths of both Ethan and Lily. But what if they had been the tip of the iceberg? What if the conspiracy went deeper than anyone realized? Sarah's instincts told her that to truly understand the scope of what had happened, she needed to speak to someone who had seen the town before its transformation. Someone who had been a part of Miller's Creek long before the corruption took root. Her thoughts drifted to Nora Davidson, an elderly woman who had lived on the outskirts of town for years. Nora was known to be a quiet soul, someone who preferred to keep to herself. But she was also a historian, with knowledge of the town's past that went far beyond anything Sarah could find in books or records. If there was anyone who could shed light on the earliest days of the cover-up, it was Nora. The air was thick with the weight of the past as Sarah drove to Nora's home. The house was small, nestled between towering trees, with a garden that appeared to be slowly overtaking the property. When Sarah knocked, she was greeted by a frail woman with silver hair and sharp, knowing eyes. "Detective Wallace, I wasn't expecting you," Nora said with a faint smile, her voice soft but carrying an unshakable strength. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mrs. Davidson," Sarah began. "I've been digging into Miller's Creek's history, and I need to ask you about something. Something I think you might know more about than anyone else." Nora's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of recognition. "I see. You've been poking around, haven't you? There's much to uncover, but be careful what you wish for. Some things are better left buried." Sarah stepped closer, her voice steady. "I need to know about the people behind the secrets, about the ones who've been pulling the strings for all these years." Nora's gaze dropped, and she sighed deeply. "It wasn't always like this, you know. Miller's Creek used to be a place of peace, but there were always whispers about the families who controlled the town. The Harris family was the one at the center, of course, but there were others too. The town was built on a foundation of lies, and it was only a matter of time before someone tried to expose them. And they silenced him," Sarah said quietly. Nora nodded. Ethan Harper. He was too smart for his own good. He started asking questions no one wanted answered. He began to dig into the town's history, into things that were meant to stay hidden. He knew about the old family's ties to organized crime, about how they had been involved in illicit activities for years. When he got too close, they had no choice. He had to be silenced. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The truth was uglier than she had imagined, and it was becoming clearer that Ethan's death wasn't a random tragedy. It was a calculated move to protect a web of deceit and corruption. "There's more," Nora continued, her voice lowering. "They didn't just kill Ethan, they killed his family too." "His family?" Sarah asked, her mind spinning. "They were never found," Nora whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "But there were rumors that Ethan's parents were involved in something much bigger than anyone realized. When they disappeared, so did any chance of truly understanding what they had been trying to expose." The more Sarah learned, the more she realized how deeply Miller's Creek's history was entwined with violence and control. She had assumed that the town's darkest secrets were buried, but as she continued to unravel the threads, she understood that the past had never truly stayed hidden. It had simply been swept aside. Nora's revelation about Ethan's family was the last piece of the puzzle. If Ethan had been murdered for what he had uncovered, then his parents' disappearance had likely been orchestrated by the same people who had killed him. The question now was, who else had been involved? And why had no one ever questioned the official story about their deaths? Sarah's mind kept turning over the connections, piecing together the details that had previously seemed irrelevant. She thought back to the letter she had found in the records, the one that hinted at something much larger. She knew now that the people who had orchestrated these deaths weren't just trying to hide one dark chapter in the town's history. They were trying to protect an entire legacy of crime, corruption, and control. Her thoughts turned to Calvin Harris. The confession he had given her had felt incomplete, almost as if he had been hiding something else. He had been complicit, yes, but Sarah knew that he wasn't the mastermind behind everything that had happened. The true power lay elsewhere, in the shadows, with those who had remained untouchable for so long. The final answer was within her grasp, but time was running out. The longer she waited, the more likely it was that someone would come for her too. The final confrontation came swiftly. Armed with everything she had learned, Nora's testimony, the old records, the cryptic letter, Sarah confronted the town's true puppet master, Victor Harris, the patriarch of the Harris family. He had been the one pulling the strings all along, ensuring that Miller's Creek's darkest secrets remained hidden. Victor's mansion stood at the edge of town, its towering silhouette dark against the setting sun. Sarah knew that this would be the moment of reckoning, the moment when everything would come to a head. When she arrived at the mansion, Victor was waiting for her. His cold, calculating gaze met hers as she stepped onto the grounds. "I knew you'd come, Detective," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of any real emotion. "I've uncovered the truth," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "It's over, Victor. You can't run from what you've done anymore." Victor smiled, a tight, cruel smile. "You think you've uncovered everything, don't you? But there's more you don't know. There are things far bigger than you can understand." "Then tell me," Sarah said, stepping closer, her eyes locked on his. "Tell me what you've been hiding." For a moment, it seemed as though Victor might finally crack, but then he leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You've been chasing ghosts, Detective, and now you're going to join them." Without warning, the lights flickered, and the mansion seemed to grow darker. It was as if the very walls of Miller's Creek were closing in around her. The truth was out, but it was clear that for some, it would never be enough. Miller's Creek would never forget what Sarah Wallace had uncovered. The truth, once buried so deeply, had been exposed, but not without a cost. The town had changed, and so had its people. Some embraced the new reality, while others chose to remain loyal to the old ways. As for Sarah, she left the town behind, knowing that justice had been served, but also understanding that the darkness would never truly vanish. In a town like Miller's Creek, secrets had a way of lingering in the shadows, waiting for someone to uncover them. And as she drove away, Sarah knew one thing for certain. The price of silence was always too high. The days after Sarah's confrontation with Victor Harris were a blur of emotions and reflection. The town of Miller's Creek, once a place that seemed peaceful and untouched, had been forever scarred. The discovery of the old family's hidden truths had shaken the community to its core. While some residents turned to their faith or their families for comfort, others whispered in dark corners, unsure of what the future would hold. As Sarah packed up her belongings, preparing to leave Miller's Creek, she felt a mixture of relief and unease. The case was officially closed. The perpetrators were either behind bars or on their way there, and the town was forever changed. But there was something about the finality of it all that gnawed at her. The lingering sense that there was still one more piece to uncover, one more truth that had yet to be exposed, hung heavily in her chest. On her last night in town, Sarah decided to visit the town cemetery, the final resting place for the people whose deaths had sparked this entire investigation. She needed closure, and for some reason, standing amidst the graves of Miller's Creek's long-forgotten citizens seemed to be the only place where she could find it. The cemetery was tucked away at the edge of town, surrounded by towering trees, whose leaves whispered in the cool evening breeze. As Sarah walked between the gravestones, she was struck by how still the air was. It felt as if the spirits of Miller's Creek were watching her, waiting for her to uncover the last elusive truth. Her footsteps echoed softly on the gravel path as she approached a weathered stone at the far corner of the cemetery, an unmarked grave overgrown with ivy and moss. Sarah had never noticed it before, but something about it called to her now. The name etched into the stone was barely legible, but she could make out the faint outline of a name, Ethan Harper. Ethan's grave had always been a mystery. Officially, it was said that Ethan had been buried in an unmarked grave due to the nature of his death, the one that had been covered up so carefully by the town's elites. But there was something deeper about this grave, something that didn't sit right with her. As she knelt down to get a closer look at the stone, Sarah noticed something strange. Beneath the faint etching of Ethan's name were other markings, scratches in the stone, as though someone had tried to carve something into the grave, but had been interrupted. Her fingers traced the markings, and as they moved along the stone, she uncovered a hidden message. They will never stop. You need to keep digging. Her heart skipped a beat. These weren't just the markings of a person who had died under tragic circumstances. This was a warning. Someone had tried to send a message from beyond the grave. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The case wasn't over. There was still someone out there. Someone who had been involved in Ethan's death. Someone who had been so determined to keep their secrets hidden that they would go to any length to ensure their past remained buried. The following day, Sarah returned to her office, her mind consumed by the cryptic message she had found on Ethan's grave. Who had written it? Why was it there? And more importantly, what did it mean by keep digging? She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were still out there, hiding in plain sight. Sarah reopened her case files and revisited her earlier notes. She combed through the interviews with the townspeople, the reports from the investigation, the records of Lily Turner's last days. Every detail seemed more significant now, as if each piece of the puzzle were a silent witness to something far darker than she had previously realized. As she pored over the files once again, Sarah came across something she had missed during the first round of her investigation, an old witness statement. It was buried among the initial reports from when Lily had first gone missing, and it was a statement from a man named Jacob Calloway. Jacob had been one of the few people in town who had seen Lily in the weeks before her disappearance. According to his account, Lily had become increasingly agitated and paranoid, convinced that someone was following her. But what stood out in Jacob's statement was his description of a black car that had been parked outside her house on several occasions, always parked in the same spot, watching her. Sarah had ignored the significance of the car at first, chalking it up to paranoia. But now, after everything that had happened, she realized that this was a key detail. The car, the presence of someone watching Lily, it all pointed to the fact that someone had been keeping tabs on her long before her disappearance. Could it be that the same person who had been stalking Lily was also involved in Ethan's death? Was there a link between the two cases that she had missed? Or was someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? Sarah knew she had to confront the townspeople once again, but this time she would be much more strategic. She needed to follow the trail of the black car, see if it had any connection to the Harris family or any of the other old families that had been involved in the town's dark history. Her first stop was the local auto repair shop, a small, inconspicuous business run by a man named Dave Holloway. Dave had been in town for as long as anyone could remember, and while he wasn't particularly talkative, Sarah had a hunch that he might know something about the black car that had been following Lily. When Sarah entered the shop, she was greeted by Dave, a man in his mid-50s with a gruff demeanor and a thick beard. "Can I help you, detective?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm investigating a few things, Dave," Sarah began. "I'm looking for information about a black car, something that might have been in Miller's Creek around the time Lily Turner went missing. I was wondering if you had any records, or could tell me if you'd seen anything unusual." Dave paused, his face hardening. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to brush her off. But then, to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "You're asking about that car, huh?" he said quietly. "I remember it. Black, sleek, kept coming around. I thought it was odd. Never thought much of it at the time. But now I see you're asking about things that shouldn't be asked." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Dave glanced around, as though checking to see if anyone was listening. "The car. Yeah, I saw it. But I also saw the man who drove it. He used to come in here from time to time, buying parts for a few repairs. Always the same guy. Quiet. Never said much. But I know who he was." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. Who was he? Dave took a deep breath, wiping his brow. He was Victor Harris's brother, the one who disappeared years ago. No one talks about him anymore, but I know who he was. His name was Samuel Harris. The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderclap. Samuel Harris, the missing brother of Victor Harris, had been in Miller's Creek all along. He had been the shadow that no one spoke of, the ghost of the town's past. And now, it seemed, he was the key to everything. Victor Harris had always been the public face of the family's power, but Samuel had been the one in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes. It all made sense now. Samuel's disappearance had never been an accident. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to get him out of the public eye, to keep his role in the town's dark history buried. As Sarah pieced it together, she realized that Samuel had likely been the one watching Lily, the one stalking her in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. He had been the one trying to silence her, just as he had done with Ethan. But now, the question remained. Where was Samuel Harris now? And why had he resurfaced? The trail led Sarah back to the mansion at the edge of Miller's Creek. There, she discovered a hidden passage beneath the house, a passage that had been sealed for years. It was a dark, narrow corridor that led to a hidden room where she found the final piece of the puzzle. Samuel Harris himself. He was still alive, and he had been living in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the darkness. The hidden passage beneath the Harris mansion was colder than Sarah expected, the air musty with the smell of long-abandoned spaces. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the dim light from her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. It felt like the mansion itself was alive, breathing in the secrets that had been buried beneath its floors. As Sarah moved deeper into the corridor, she realized that she had crossed into a space that no one had set foot in for years, if not decades. This was not just a hidden room. It was a vault, a place where the past had been carefully sealed away. The walls were lined with old wooden shelves, their surfaces covered in dust, and on the shelves were stacks of boxes, records, old journals, photographs, and letters. And at the far end of the room, seated in an old leather chair, was Samuel Harris. He looked almost the same as Sarah remembered from the few blurry photographs she had seen. The same sharp eyes, the same cold, calculating smile. But now, those eyes were fixed on her, with a strange mix of amusement and something darker. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, it was as if he had been waiting for her all along. "You've been a persistent one, haven't you?" Samuel said, his voice smooth, but tinged with an unsettling calm. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd make it this far." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "You've been hiding in plain sight, haven't you? All this time, right under our noses." Samuel's smile widened, and he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. "It was never about hiding, Detective. It was about waiting. The time wasn't right before. But you've uncovered things that I thought were long forgotten. I'll give you credit for that." "What do you want, Samuel? Why are you doing this? What's the point of all this destruction?" Sarah demanded, her voice steady, but laced with the urgency of the moment. He chuckled softly, shaking his head as though she had missed the point entirely. "Destruction? No. You're mistaken. It's not about destruction. It's about control. This town, Miller's Creek, was built on secrets, on a foundation of power that goes back generations. Do you really think those at the top are going to let their empire crumble just because of a few insignificant lives? No, Detective. We do what's necessary to protect our legacy. What happened to Lily Turner? What happened to Ethan Harper? All of it was part of maintaining the balance." Sarah took a step forward, her voice rising. "You're a monster. You think you're above the law, above everything else." "Law." Samuel's voice was sharp now, almost amused. "Law doesn't matter when you're above it. I'm not a monster, Detective. I'm the necessary force that keeps this town running. People like Lily, like Ethan, they threatened that. They threatened the system, so they had to be dealt with. It's as simple as that." Sarah's pulse quickened. The twisted logic in Samuel's words was maddening. It was clear now that his sense of entitlement was unmatched, but it also made her understand how far he was willing to go to protect the old power structures of Miller's Creek. He wasn't just a murderer. He was an architect of a much darker, more insidious conspiracy. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Samuel stood up, his tall figure looming over her. His voice dropped, and his eyes darkened. "You should have stayed out of it, Sarah. You were never meant to be involved. But now you've made things personal," he said, his tone chilling. "And I don't make mistakes." Before Sarah could react, Samuel reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small silver object. It glinted in the dim light, the barrel of a gun. The weight of the situation hit Sarah all at once. Her mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to act. Samuel wasn't just talking now. He was threatening her life. But Sarah had faced danger before, and she wasn't about to let fear control her. She took a deep breath, her hand slipping toward the concealed weapon she carried beneath her jacket. Her thoughts raced, piecing together the options she had, knowing time was running out. "You really think you can get away with this?" Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "You've already lost, Samuel. You can't kill the truth." Samuel's eyes narrowed, and his hand tightened around the gun. "I've already won. I always win, Detective. Miller's Creek will always be mine. And now you'll be gone. Just another victim to add to the pile." But before Samuel could make a move, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the room, followed by hurried footsteps. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound. It was someone coming to help. "Sarah!" a voice called out, sharp and urgent. It was Nora Davidson, the elderly historian who had been a crucial ally in the investigation. She had somehow tracked Sarah down. Before Sarah could fully process what was happening, Nora was in the doorway, holding a heavy metal object in her hand, something she had clearly found in the mansion. "Let her go, Samuel." Nora's voice rang with authority. Samuel froze, momentarily distracted by the sudden appearance of the old woman. It was just enough for Sarah to act. With lightning speed, she drew her gun and aimed it at Samuel. "I think it's time for you to face justice," Sarah said, her voice cold and commanding. Samuel's eyes flashed with fury, but he knew there was no way out now. Slowly, he lowered his gun, a dark smile playing on his lips. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Samuel sneered. "This town, this whole mess, it's far bigger than you realize. Even if you kill me, the legacy will remain. The power will always find a way to survive." But Sarah didn't flinch. She knew the truth now. Samuel's reign of terror had lasted far too long, but it was finally over. "Not anymore," she said firmly. With that, the mansion, the town, and the legacy that had fueled so much pain and suffering began to crumble. Samuel Harris was arrested, his empire falling apart as the town's darkest secrets were exposed. The trial was swift. Samuel Harris was convicted of multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and other crimes. The Harris family's influence over Miller's Creek was officially dismantled, and the old guard that had controlled the town for generations was torn apart. Many of the town's most powerful families were revealed to have been complicit in the crimes, and justice was finally served. But the scars of the past were deep, and it would take time for Miller's Creek to heal. The town would never be the same. It had been forever changed by the revelations of its dark history. Yet, in a strange way, the truth had set the town free. It was no longer haunted by the ghosts of its past, and the people could finally breathe. Sarah Wallace, now a hero in the eyes of many, quietly left Miller's Creek. Though she had brought justice to the town, the emotional toll of the case weighed heavily on her. She knew she had done the right thing, but the darkness she had uncovered would stay with her forever. As she drove away from Miller's Creek, Sarah looked in her rearview mirror at the town shrinking in the distance. The past might never truly fade, but at least for now, the shadows had been chased away, and that was enough. Years passed, and life in Miller's Creek slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The scars remained, but the town had changed. The new leaders of Miller's Creek were committed to rebuilding, to making amends for the injustices of the past. Though Sarah Wallace never returned, her name became a symbol of courage, of resilience in the face of unimaginable darkness. And though she had left, the legacy of her actions lingered, a reminder that even the most entrenched power could be toppled by those willing to seek the truth. It was an ordinary Tuesday when Emma Hawthorne received the letter. though the words it carried were far from ordinary. She had grown accustomed to the small things in life: a new architectural project to sink her teeth into, a quiet coffee shop morning, the occasional professional award for her designs. Her world was made of structure, logic, and precision. She hadn't expected her late Uncle Isaac to drag her into something that felt like a haunting from a forgotten past. The letter arrived in an old-fashioned envelope, yellowed at the edges and stamped with a seal that was unfamiliar. It was heavier than usual, thicker than a typical correspondence, and the wax seal was marked with an intricate emblem: a crescent moon cradling a twisted tree. The symbol seemed foreign but familiar, as though it had once belonged to another age. Emma opened it carefully, aware that whatever this was, it wasn't typical. The handwriting inside was elegant, yet strange, with looping letters that felt almost archaic. To my niece, Emma Hawthorne. If you are reading this, then it is time to fulfill your inheritance. The Hawthorne estate, the mansion that once belonged to your ancestors, has been passed to you. You have my apologies for the abrupt nature of this revelation, but there are things I must tell you. Please, if you value your sanity, heed my words and do not enter the house unprepared. Emma paused at that line. She knew her Uncle Isaac was eccentric, perhaps even a bit mad, but this was something different. The letter continued. The mansion has long been more than just a house. It is tied to forces you cannot comprehend. I have spent years studying the occult, the paranormal, and the dark history buried in the mansion's foundation. I know you will dismiss this warning, as I once did, but trust me when I say that this inheritance comes with a price. You are the key to something ancient, Emma. Do not ignore the house's true nature, for if you do, it will claim you. Emma felt the letter tremble slightly in her hands. She had always viewed Isaac as the eccentric member of the family, the one who kept to himself, spoke of strange things, and refused to explain his behavior. But the idea that the house was alive, or that it could claim her, felt ludicrous. The letter ended with a simple, foreboding line: the mansion awaits. You must face your past, and the house will demand a price. The walls are waiting for you. It was days later that Emma found herself driving up the long, winding road toward the Hawthorne estate. The letter still felt absurd in her mind, but there was a gnawing curiosity, a need to understand what Isaac had meant by his cryptic warning. The drive was long and eerie, the countryside shifting from vibrant autumn hues to barren, dark woods that seemed to swallow up the road. The mansion loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette rising up from the trees, almost blending into the ominous gray sky. The closer Emma got, the more unsettling the estate appeared. The tall iron gates, once grand and polished, now stood crooked and rusted, their sharp edges reaching like jagged teeth toward the sky. The driveway was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, and the trees surrounding the property twisted unnaturally, as if they were trying to keep her away. The mansion itself looked like something out of a Gothic novel. Towering spires, stonework that had once been immaculate, but was now weathered and decaying. There was a grim grandeur to it, a feeling of something ancient that had been left behind to rot in the silence. Emma parked her car in front of the mansion, and as she stepped out, the air hit her like a wall. It was cold, almost biting, and the forest surrounding the house seemed to hold its breath. She felt an inexplicable chill creep down her spine as she approached the front door, her footsteps echoing on the stone path. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the cold brass handle. For a fleeting second, she considered turning back. After all, the letter had said she must be prepared, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed open the door. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the flickering flames of an old chandelier above. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. It was as though the mansion had been frozen in time, untouched for decades. The floors creaked beneath her feet, and the silence was suffocating. Every step she took seemed to echo in the vast emptiness of the foyer. The walls were lined with old portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes following her every movement. There was a grand staircase that twisted upward into the shadows, and at the far end of the room stood a grand fireplace, its stone mantel cracked and covered in a layer of dust. Emma took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, its presence almost palpable. It felt like the mansion was alive, as though it were waiting for something, or someone. Emma moved deeper into the mansion, her footsteps careful as she explored the rooms. She had to find the library, as Isaac's letter had instructed. The mansion felt like a maze. Every hallway led to another. Every door seemed to open into more shadows. The heavy silence was unnerving. She almost wished for the sound of her own voice to break the stillness, but she resisted the urge to speak. This place felt like it would swallow her words, as though it didn't want her to disturb the atmosphere that had settled in. Eventually, she found it. The library. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and the room was filled with the smell of old paper and leather. Shelves upon shelves of dusty, leather-bound books stretched from floor to ceiling. Some of the books appeared to be ancient, their spines cracked and worn. There were artifacts scattered across tables, strange, unidentifiable objects that seemed to hum with a kind of energy Emma couldn't place. At the far end of the room, on a large oak desk, she found what she had been looking for. Isaac's journals. They were piled high, each one filled with strange symbols and half-finished thoughts. Emma flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling as she scanned the writing. The first journal was filled with musings on the house's construction, descriptions of rooms that no longer seemed to exist, details about the architecture that hinted at something otherworldly. But it was the later journals that caught her attention. They were darker, filled with rambling thoughts about rituals and ancient practices, occult symbols, and references to a being called the Watcher. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting more erratic. The house is not just stone and timber. It is a vessel. The Watcher is bound to the mansion, bound to the land itself. It has waited centuries for someone to open the door. Emma, you must leave. The Watcher has seen you. It will not let you go. Emma's heart raced as she read. The pages grew increasingly disturbing. Her uncle had known about this force, had known about the entity bound within the walls of the house. Was this the reason for his isolation? His madness? Had he truly been trying to protect her from something that she couldn't even begin to understand? The first night in the mansion was one that Emma would never forget. She had attempted to sleep, but the house would not allow it. Every creak, every groan of the walls seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. At times, she swore she could hear footsteps echoing in the halls, distant whispers in the air. But when she went to check, the house was empty. Suddenly, she heard it. A voice, soft and barely a whisper, coming from the corner of the room. Emma spun around, but there was nothing. The air grew colder, and she felt a strange pull at the base of her spine. She could sense something watching her. She tried to dismiss the feeling as nothing more than nerves, but she couldn't shake it. There was something in the house, something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. Emma spent the next few days exploring the mansion, her mind constantly pulling her toward the mysteries that lingered in the dark corners of its walls. Despite her better judgment, she couldn't stop herself from delving deeper into her uncle's journals. Every entry seemed to beckon her, urging her to understand what Isaac had feared. and despite the sense of dread gnawing at her, Emma knew that there was no turning back. The mansion had claimed her in ways that were too complex, too woven into the fabric of her existence. The journals spoke of rituals, symbols, and a history that spanned centuries. They detailed the Hawthorne family's connection to a dark force, an entity known as the Watcher, which had been tied to the mansion since its very inception. Isaac had written of ancient pacts, of desperate attempts to banish the force, but each attempt had failed. The mansion had been built as a containment vessel, its architecture designed to bind the Watcher to the land, to prevent it from escaping into the world. But the mansion itself was not just a physical structure. It was, as Isaac had discovered, a vessel for the entity's power. And now it seemed that the force was beginning to awaken once again. Emma had once thought that her uncle's obsession with the occult had made him delusional, but now she wasn't so sure. There were things in the house, things she couldn't explain, that began to make her question her own understanding of reality. The temperature fluctuated in odd ways. One moment, the air would be thick with the chill of winter, and the next, a suffocating heat would settle in, as though the house was alive with shifting moods. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to grow longer with each passing day, stretching impossibly across the floor. The whispers that Emma had heard on her first night grew louder, more distinct, until she could hear them clearly, as if someone, or something, was speaking directly into her ear. But when she turned, there was nothing. Only the silence. Only the cold breath of the house surrounding her. One night, as Emma sat in the library, reading through Isaac's journals again, something strange occurred. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Her breath misted in the air, and the fire in the hearth flickered out with a sudden gust of wind. She shivered, pulling her cardigan tightly around her shoulders. It was an unseasonably cold night, but this was different. This was a chill that seemed to seep into her bones, a cold that wasn't of this world. And then, it happened. The walls around her began to distort, warping and twisting like liquid. The bookshelves stretched outward, their wooden surfaces bending and cracking, while the floor beneath her feet rippled like water. Emma gasped, her heart pounding in her chest as the room around her shifted and changed. She was no longer in the library. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a grand hall, its walls adorned with ancient tapestries that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The air smelled musty, old, like the inside of a tomb, and before her stood a figure, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes. His face was familiar, though it took Emma a moment to place him. It was her Uncle Isaac, but his expression was vacant, lifeless. His clothes were tattered, as if they had been worn for decades, and his eyes were empty, as though he had been drained of life. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice rasping as though it had not been used in years. "Uncle Isaac?" Emma's voice trembled as she spoke his name, but the man before her didn't respond. Instead, his lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "The Watcher is awake," he continued, his voice now a low murmur, as though the words were being drawn from the very depths of the earth. "It has been waiting for you, waiting for the bloodline to return." Suddenly, the floor beneath Emma's feet buckled, and she fell forward, landing hard on the cold stone. She looked up to see the mansion's walls trembling, cracking, as though they were coming apart at the seams. The floor around her began to split open, revealing a vast chasm beneath, filled with swirling shadows and whispers that tugged at her very soul. The figure of Isaac vanished into the darkness, his voice echoing in her mind. "You must leave before it's too late," Emma screamed, but the world around her dissolved into nothingness. Emma awoke in the library, gasping for breath. Her heart was racing, her body drenched in sweat. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious, or how she had ended up back in the library. The room seemed unchanged, as if nothing had happened at all. But the lingering feeling of dread was unmistakable. The vision felt so real, too real. She could still hear Isaac's voice in her head, the warning echoing through her thoughts. The Watcher is awake. It has been waiting for you. She tried to steady her breathing, pushing herself up from the chair. The vision was just that. A vision. Or was it? She couldn't tell anymore. The lines between reality and dream had begun to blur, and the deeper she went into the history of the mansion, the more she felt like she was becoming part of its dark story. It wasn't long before Emma made a chilling discovery. In the corner of the library, hidden behind a stack of old journals, was a small door, so well concealed that she had nearly missed it. With a mix of hesitation and determination, she approached it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down into the basement. The stairs descended into darkness, the air growing colder with each step she took. She could almost hear the whispers again, faint at first, then growing louder as she ventured deeper into the depths of the mansion. The air felt thick, as though it was pressing down on her, suffocating her with an unseen weight. When she reached the bottom, she found herself standing in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched into the stone like ancient carvings. In the center of the room stood a large, cracked mirror, its surface smeared with dust and grime. But it was the reflection in the mirror that made Emma's blood run cold. It wasn't her own reflection that stared back at her. It was the figure of a woman, pale, with dark, hollow eyes and long, disheveled hair. Her face was twisted in a grotesque expression of pain. Her lips parted as if she were trying to scream, but no sound came out. Emma recoiled, her heart hammering in her chest. She stumbled backward, bumping into the stone wall. The woman in the mirror reached out a hand toward her, her fingers curling as if to drag Emma into the glass. Suddenly, Emma's vision blurred, and she felt an overwhelming sense of terror. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. She turned and fled up the stairs, her pulse pounding in her ears, the shadows chasing her every step. The night of Emma's vision changed everything. She could no longer deny the truth. The mansion was alive, its very foundation steeped in the darkness of the past. But she knew, deep down, that the Watcher was more than just a ghost. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting for her return. In the following days, Emma stopped trying to reason with her fear. She stopped trying to find logical explanations. The mansion was pulling her in, its grip tightening with every moment. Her nights were filled with restless dreams, her days spent searching through Isaac's journals for any clue that might give her the strength to confront what waited in the darkness. But the more she searched, the more she realized that the answers she sought were buried within herself. The deeper Emma delves into the mansion's history, the more she uncovers about her own family's connection to the Watcher. Her uncle's obsession with the occult had been driven by a desperate attempt to understand the malevolent entity that haunted their bloodline. Now, Emma must confront the truth. She is the key to either freeing herself from the mansion's grip or becoming the Watcher's next victim. As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself losing track of time. The mansion seemed to warp around her, stretching out endless corridors and rooms that shifted like a labyrinth. Sometimes, she would walk through a doorway and find herself back in the same hallway, as if the house was playing tricks on her mind. At other times, the shadows seemed to come alive, whispering faint, unintelligible words that sent chills down her spine. Every night, the dreams came stronger, vivid, relentless. She would wake up in cold sweats, her heart racing, her mind unable to distinguish between the dream world and reality. The woman in the mirror was always there, reaching out to her with an outstretched hand, her eyes wide with silent horror. Emma tried to ignore the nagging sensation that the house was changing her, that its dark energy was seeping into her very soul. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing herself, becoming someone, or something, else entirely. She had to confront the truth, no matter how terrifying. The journals Isaac left behind were the key. Her uncle's descent into madness had mirrored her own now. His obsession with the Watcher had driven him to the brink of insanity. But Emma was different. She had a purpose. She had to uncover the truth of her inheritance, even if it meant confronting the very thing that had haunted her family for generations. One late evening, as the mansion sank into an oppressive silence, Emma stumbled upon a hidden room in the farthest wing of the house. It was tucked away behind a false wall, barely perceptible unless one knew where to look. She had passed by it countless times, but tonight, a strange compulsion drove her to search every corner of the mansion. The room was small, filled with dusty artifacts and strange objects she didn't recognize. At the center, under a large wooden chest, was a worn leather-bound book, its cover adorned with the same symbol that had appeared on Isaac's letters, the crescent moon surrounding the twisted tree. As her fingers brushed the cover, a cold rush of air swept through the room, and the book seemed to pulse in her hands. Opening the book, Emma found a series of cryptic notes and drawings. At first, it seemed like the ramblings of a madman, but as she carefully examined each page, something clicked. These were not just ramblings. These were detailed accounts of rituals, symbols, and incantations designed to invoke the Watcher. And then, at the end of the book, there was a page that nearly made Emma drop it in horror. The Hawthorne bloodline. The text was short but clear. The bloodline of Hawthorne is tied to the Watcher. Every generation the house seeks a successor, a descendant, to fulfill its dark purpose. Only the chosen one may free or bind the Watcher. The firstborn of each generation must make a choice: sacrifice the soul to contain the Watcher, or release it to consume the world. The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Emma's hands trembled as the realization hit her like a physical blow. She was the chosen one. She had been born to confront the Watcher, to either seal its fate or let it escape into the world, bringing destruction to all. It was no longer a question of whether the mansion had chosen her. It was a matter of what choice she would make. Emma could feel the Watcher's presence growing stronger, its power pressing against her thoughts like a heavy weight. It was no longer confined to the dark corners of the house. It had begun to seep into her mind. At night, she could hear its voice, low, whispering, calling her name. At first, the whispers were faint, like distant murmurings, but now they were insistent, growing louder every hour. Sometimes she could swear they were right behind her, just out of sight, but whenever she turned around, there was nothing. The entity had been watching her since her arrival, and now it seemed to be slowly driving her insane. The mansion was not just a physical structure, it was a living, breathing thing, tied to the Watcher. The walls seemed to shift at its command, moving to trap her inside. The air grew colder and strange. Unsettling noises filled the halls, scraping sounds, low growls, and the distant echo of footsteps that were never hers. One night, as Emma wandered the house in a sleepless daze, she found herself standing in front of the same large mirror that had shown her the woman's reflection. This time, the woman wasn't silent. "You can feel it, can't you?" the woman said, her voice a haunting whisper that reverberated through the air. Emma froze, her body paralyzed by a terror so raw it threatened to crush her. The woman's face twisted into a grotesque expression, her eyes dark and lifeless. She was a reflection of Emma, but not Emma. She was someone from the past, someone who had failed. "You are the last of us," the woman continued, her voice filled with sorrow. The Watcher's hunger is insatiable. It cannot be contained forever. Emma stepped closer, drawn to the reflection, unable to tear her eyes away. She could see the woman's features clearly now, her pale, sunken skin, her hollow eyes. She looked like a prisoner, trapped in the mirror for eternity. "You must decide," the woman said, her voice cracking. "Either you sacrifice yourself to bind it forever, or you unleash it, and the world will fall." The reflection reached out, its fingers tapping against the glass. The touch was cold, like death itself. With the weight of her family's curse pressing down on her, Emma finally understood the severity of her inheritance. The mansion was not merely a house, it was a prison, and she was its warden. Or if she failed, it would be the release of an unimaginable terror. The Watcher had been contained for centuries, trapped by the Hawthorne bloodline's sacrifice, but it would not be contained forever. As the final night in the mansion drew near, Emma descended into the heart of the house, into the labyrinth of stone and shadow that had been built to hold the Watcher in place. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the presence of the entity. In the basement, she found the ritual room, a vast circular chamber carved into the stone itself. The floor was etched with symbols, and in the center of the room was a stone altar, stained dark with age. Above it, a large blood-red crystal hung suspended in midair, pulsing with dark energy. Emma had come to understand that the crystal was the heart of the mansion, the focal point of the Watcher's power. To contain it, she would need to sacrifice herself, her blood, to bind the Watcher's essence to the mansion once more. But the price was steep. The ritual would not only bind the entity, it would also ensure her eternal imprisonment within the house. Or, if she chose not to perform the ritual, the Watcher would break free. It would feast on her, and then the world beyond would fall. The mansion would be its gateway. With trembling hands, Emma approached the altar. She could hear the Watcher now, its voice a maddening cacophony of whispers and threats. The air seemed to vibrate with its power. For a long moment, she stood there, torn between the weight of her bloodline's history and the horrors of what the future would become. Emma stood before the altar, the pulsing red crystal hanging in the air like an ominous beating heart. The air was thick with the presence of the Watcher. She could hear its whispers, now clear and insistent, as if the very walls of the mansion were speaking to her. They were promises, threats, and temptations all at once, urging her to take the final step. "Release me, and all will be as it was. You will be free of this prison, Emma." The voice was deep, guttural, a promise laced with malice. She could feel the pull of it, like a magnet drawing her toward the crystal. "You are bound by blood, but not by fate. Let me go, and your inheritance will be your salvation. I will offer you power. I will offer you freedom." The whispers continued to swirl around her, and for a moment, Emma felt the weight of them, almost as though the house itself was alive, breathing, watching. The walls were closing in, pressing against her, demanding that she make her decision. She looked down at her own hands, shaking. The bloodline that had cursed her had also gifted her with the power to end this, if she was willing to pay the price. The ritual Isaac had described in his journals was clear now, more than ever. It required the blood of the firstborn of the Hawthorne line, the one destined to either seal or unleash the Watcher, the one who would decide the fate of the house, the fate of the world. Sacrifice yourself to contain the Watcher, or unleash it to wreak havoc upon all that you hold dear. For a long moment, Emma stood frozen. She could feel the weight of the house's dark history pressing down on her, each echo, each whisper of the past urging her toward one decision. And yet, a voice within her screamed for freedom. freedom from this place, freedom from the chains that bound her to the mansion, to the Watcher. But was that freedom worth the cost? Was she willing to gamble with the fate of the world for her own escape? The Watcher's voice grew louder, more insistent, its promises slipping into her thoughts like poison. You are alone in this. Your uncle tried and failed. The house will never let you go. Its words twisted and slithered through her mind, feeding her fear, her doubt. You don't have to be the one to suffer. Let go of the past. Let the house go. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the glowing crystal. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she could feel herself being torn in two. One part of her wanted to listen to the Watcher, to embrace the power, to break free from the chains of her inheritance and the mansion's haunting grip. The other part, the part that had always been her, wanted to protect the world from the dark forces that lurked in the shadows. She thought of the woman in the mirror, the one who had begged her to make the right choice, the reflection that had seemed so desperate, so full of regret. It was a reflection of the past, a past that had failed. And then Emma realized something. It wasn't about freedom, it was about sacrifice. The Watcher had preyed upon her family for generations, had twisted their desires and fears until they had been consumed. But Emma wasn't like them. She had the power to stop it, to prevent the same fate from befalling the world. With a sense of clarity that was almost painful, Emma understood. She was the last of the Hawthorne bloodline. She was the one who had to decide, but it was her decision to make. She could choose to fight, to end this cycle. She would not let herself be consumed by the darkness. Emma's mind was made up. She took a deep, steadying breath and stepped closer to the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. The crystal pulsed more rapidly now, its red light filling the room with a malevolent glow. The Watcher was stirring, growing stronger with each passing second. It wanted her. It needed her. Emma knelt before the altar, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the cold stone surface. She looked down at the dark symbols etched into the floor, ancient markings that had been placed there by her ancestors, by the ones who had come before her. The rituals had been passed down through generations, each one hoping to contain the Watcher, but never fully understanding the cost. She closed her eyes, her mind focused on the incantation Isaac had written in his journals. She had read it 1,000 times, but now it felt different. Now, it wasn't just words on a page. It was her only hope. Ancient power, bound by blood, trapped within these walls. Hear my plea. I offer myself to bind the darkness, to break the chains that have held us for so long. She felt the energy around her shift as the Watcher's power swelled, pressing against her, urging her to stop. No, you cannot bind me. You cannot stop what is inevitable. The words echoed in her mind, but Emma didn't falter. She had made her choice. She placed her hand on the crystal, and the room erupted in light, blinding and sharp, like a thunderclap. The floor beneath her feet cracked, and the air grew thick with the power of the Watcher's rage. The very walls of the mansion seemed to scream in protest as Emma's blood began to flow, her own essence feeding into the ritual, locking the Watcher in place. She could feel it, clawing at her, desperate to escape, to consume her. But Emma held firm, her mind locked on the ancient words that would bind the creature forever. The power surged, threatening to overwhelm her, but Emma fought back, forcing her will upon the crystal. Her blood seeped into the stone, merging with the dark energy, and the Watcher screamed in fury. Its voice filled the room, shaking the very foundation of the mansion. "You cannot hold me," it roared, its voice like thunder. "I will consume you, all of you." The crystal flared brighter, its light blinding, its energy more intense than anything Emma had ever felt. She could feel the Watcher's power pressing into her mind, threatening to break her resolve. The house seemed to quake around her, the walls cracking, the very earth beneath her trembling. But Emma held on. She focused on the words, on the intent to seal the Watcher away forever. With a final desperate cry, she completed the incantation. The crystal shattered with a deafening explosion, its light blinding, and the mansion seemed to tremble as the power of the Watcher was sealed once more. And then, silence. The mansion was still. Emma's breathing was ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her hands were bloodied, the ritual taking its toll on her physical form. But it was done. The Watcher had been bound. As she stood there in the aftermath, the light of the shattered crystal dimming in the center of the room, Emma felt a deep sense of relief. The house, now silent, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as well. The malevolent presence was gone, for now. The darkness that had plagued the Hawthorne family for centuries had finally been contained. But Emma knew that the price had been high. She could feel the weight of the sacrifice. She had given a part of herself to end the curse, to save the world from the Watcher's wrath. She looked around the chamber, the ancient symbols now dim, no longer pulsing with dark energy. The house was quiet. The mansion, which had once seemed so alive with malevolent energy, was now still. And for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a flicker of hope. She had made her choice. She had ended the curse. But the question remained, what would life be like after all of this? The mansion, her inheritance, would never truly leave her. It was part of her now. But Emma had survived, and perhaps that was all that mattered. Months passed, and Emma moved on with her life. The mansion remained a shadow in her past, its influence still lingering in her thoughts. She couldn't entirely escape it, nor did she wish to. The mansion and its dark legacy were a part of her, an inheritance she had both inherited and overcome. The Watcher was gone, sealed away, but the world was still fragile. Emma knew she had done what needed to be done, but she also understood that some legacies are never truly gone. And perhaps in the future, another descendant would have to face the darkness once more. But for now, Emma Hawthorne was free. The weeks following the binding of the Watcher were quiet, unsettlingly so. Emma had returned to the city, to the life she had carefully rebuilt after years of isolation. The mansion, though still standing in its distant corner of her mind, no longer called to her in the same way. She no longer felt its oppressive pull, but the peace felt fragile. A distant echo lingered, one she couldn't entirely shake off. The nightmares had stopped, thankfully, but in their place, she had found herself wandering into the quiet corners of her mind, searching for remnants of the darkness she had sealed away. At night, she would lie in bed, listening to the silence around her, almost waiting for the whispers to return, but they never did. In the mornings, she would sit at her kitchen table, gazing out the window at the gray sky. The world outside had moved on, life bustling in ways that felt foreign to her. Yet Emma still couldn't forget the life she had left behind. The mansion, her family's legacy, the burden of her bloodline. It was the strangest thing. This new, tentative life of hers. She was free, or so she thought. But what kind of freedom could she truly have when every part of her past had been touched by the mansion's dark influence? Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee, and for a moment, the shape of the mirror in the mansion flashed in her mind, that haunting image of the woman who had warned her. It felt like an echo in her very soul, like a part of her had been left behind, still trapped within those walls. She couldn't erase what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, she could find some semblance of peace in this new life. One afternoon, as Emma was going through the pile of letters that had accumulated on her desk, One caught her attention. The envelope was a thick, cream-colored parchment, sealed with black wax, an unfamiliar symbol embossed in its center. She recognized it instantly. The crescent moon surrounding the twisted tree, the same symbol from her uncle's journals. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anything related to the mansion to resurface so soon. Not like this. She hesitated, feeling a rising dread clawing at her chest. Was there something she had missed? Had the Watcher found another way to reach her? Taking a deep breath, Emma broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The letter was written in elegant, almost archaic handwriting. The words were dark, heavy with a warning that seemed to seep from the page. To the heir of Hawthorne. Though the Watcher may be sealed within the walls of its prison, its influence does not die. The bloodline you carry is not just a curse, it is a key, and like all keys, it can unlock doors better left closed. The Watcher is bound, yes, but its reach extends beyond the confines of that mansion. The pact you have made is not without its consequences. The ritual you performed is merely a pause in an ancient game, a cycle that is far from over. Its power, like the house itself, is but dormant, waiting, always waiting. Be wary of those who may come to you. Not all will be what they appear to be. There are others who seek the Watcher's release. Some of them may already be near. There is no escaping the Hawthorne legacy, for it will follow you until the end. You were not the first to bear the blood of this cursed line, and you will not be the last. In time, the Watcher will seek another. Your victory is but temporary, and the price you paid for it will be far more than you realize. It is not just the mansion that binds you. It is your very soul. A friend. The letter fell from Emma's trembling hands, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes darted around the room, as if she might see a shadow moving just outside her window. She had thought it was over. She had thought she had severed the ties to her past, to the curse that had haunted her family for generations. But the letter, the message was clear. It was not over. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt the walls closing in again. The shadows from the mansion's halls seemed to reach out to her, creeping into her mind, reminding her of the ancient force she had thought she had bound forever. The Watcher had not been destroyed. It had merely been paused, dormant. And there were others. Someone else wanted to finish what she had started. Someone who knew the power of the Hawthorne bloodline and was willing to risk everything to bring the Watcher back. The letter's cryptic message haunted her. Not all will be what they appear to be. What did that mean? Who could she trust? The uncertainty gnawed at her, the dread coiling in her stomach like a serpent. Days passed, and Emma found herself unable to focus on anything. Her work, her friends, her life. Every moment was clouded by the fear that had begun to take root in her once peaceful existence. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something or someone was waiting for her to make a mistake. Then, one evening, as she was returning home from the office, a figure appeared at her doorstep. A woman, standing silently in the dark. She was dressed in a long, flowing black coat, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. She had the air of someone who didn't belong, someone who had walked straight out of a shadow. Emma's pulse quickened as the woman stepped forward. "I've been looking for you, Emma Hawthorne," the stranger said, her voice soft but unmistakable. "I need to speak with you." Emma's heart skipped. There was something familiar about this woman, something unnervingly familiar. The same unsettling presence, the same weight of the past that had haunted her during her time in the mansion. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking. The woman removed her hat slowly, revealing her face. It was almost a mirror image of Emma's own, her features the same, but twisted with age, her eyes dark, hollow. She smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "I am a messenger," the woman said cryptically, "a harbinger of what's to come." Emma stepped back, her mind racing. "I don't understand." I stopped it. "The Watcher is—" Paused. The woman interrupted, her voice sharp. "You sealed it away. But the curse of the Hawthorne bloodline is never truly broken. You are merely the latest in a long line of those who have tried to keep it contained. You are not the first to try and fail." The woman's words hit Emma like a physical blow. The truth, once more, was too painful to face. "You've only delayed it," the woman continued. "And now the Watcher will return. It will not forget. And neither will you." The woman's lips parted in a smile that sent a chill through Emma's entire being. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know about all of this?" she demanded, trying to steady her racing pulse. The woman's smile faded. She stepped closer, and Emma instinctively took a step back. The figure before her was not the friendly face she had expected. It was cold, cruel, as if the woman standing in front of her was a reflection of the very darkness Emma had battled in the mansion. "The Watcher is not bound by time or place, Emma. It is a force that transcends both. You think you ended it, but it's been waiting for the right moment to rise again." The woman's eyes narrowed, and in that instant, Emma realized the terrible truth. The Watcher wasn't just an entity. It was a force that fed on the Hawthorne bloodline, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash its full power. "You are the key, Emma," the woman said, her voice full of dark promise. "And I have come to take it from you." Emma's heart thudded in her chest as the woman, her doppelganger, stepped closer. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to run, to escape this woman and the dark force she represented. But there was no escaping the curse of the Hawthorne bloodline. There never had been. The woman's eyes glinted with malice, her lips curling into a smile that made Emma's skin crawl. "You're not the first to inherit the mansion, Emma," she whispered. "You're just the latest pawn in a long game. And now, I've come to collect what's mine." Emma recoiled, her mind racing. The words were too much to take in all at once. Pawn in a long game. The idea that she was merely a part of some larger, unbroken cycle filled her with dread. "What do you want from me?" Emma managed to choke out. Her breath was shallow, and her hands trembled. The woman smiled again, but this time the smile was cold and sharp, like a knife drawn across a stone surface. "I want what you hold most dear, the bloodline that you carry. The Watcher feeds on your essence, Emma. It doesn't care about you as a person. It wants the power in your veins." The woman stepped back, the dim streetlight above casting long shadows across her face. "You sealed it away, yes, but the bloodline cannot be contained, not forever. And when the time comes for the Watcher to rise again, it will need you. You are the key." Emma felt her knees weaken, her world spinning. This was all happening so fast. She had barely come to terms with the fact that the Watcher's influence still lingered. And now, this stranger, this woman, had come to make it clear that the battle wasn't over. She had only delayed the inevitable. "You've come to make sure I fail," Emma whispered, the realization dawning upon her. The woman nodded slowly, almost regretfully. "It's not that simple, Emma. The Watcher has its own designs, and those designs have always included you. You were born for this, whether you like it or not." Emma's mind whirled with 1,000 thoughts, each one clashing violently with the next. Her family, her inheritance, her future, everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, felt like it was crumbling around her. The woman standing before her, this agent of the Watcher, had shattered the illusion that Emma had finally escaped the mansion's curse. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I thought I ended it. The Watcher was sealed. She shook her head in frustration. "I gave everything to stop it. Her words faltered. The woman stepped forward, her expression softening, just enough to make Emma feel the weight of her next words. "You're not meant to end the Watcher, Emma. You're meant to feed it. You were born into this legacy, and when the time comes, you will give it what it wants. Your essence. All of it." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. She took an instinctive step back, her eyes wide. "I won't." But she was too late. The woman's eyes flashed darkly, as though a sinister truth was finally about to be revealed. "The Watcher's influence has already spread far beyond your knowledge. There are those, far more powerful than you realize, who are already working to release it. They've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who could be both the vessel and the key to its power." "Who?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. She refused to be a pawn again. "Who are they? What do they want?" The woman gave her a rueful smile. "That's something you'll have to find out for yourself. But one thing is certain, Emma. You can't escape the legacy of your bloodline. The Watcher will return." "And you?" She paused, as if savoring the moment. "You will bring it back." Before Emma could react, the woman turned on her heel and began to walk away, her form blending into the night like a shadow. The weight of her words lingered in the air like smoke, suffocating and cold. The woman's warning echoed in Emma's mind long after she disappeared into the darkness. The Watcher's return was not a matter of if, but when. And when that time came, Emma knew that she would be a part of it, a vessel, a pawn, or worse, a sacrifice. She felt the panic rising in her chest, her thoughts racing. What could she do? What was left for her now? But then, amidst the chaos of her racing thoughts, one thought stood out. There was one place she had to return to: the mansion. She had thought that the mansion was a prison, a dark, cursed place that had once held her captive. But now she realized that it was far more than that. It was the epicenter of this whole horrific chain of events, the source of the Watcher's power, the place where everything had begun. It wasn't enough to run anymore. She needed answers. She needed to confront whatever dark force was still lingering there, to face the true horror head on. Perhaps then, and only then, would she have any chance at stopping it, for good. With a new sense of determination, Emma packed a bag. She would return to the mansion. She would face her past, whatever it took. But even as she made her decision, one terrifying thought consumed her mind. Would she ever truly escape the legacy of the Hawthorne bloodline? Or was it already too late? Emma arrived at the mansion just as the sun began to set. The house loomed before her, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the fading light of day. It had been weeks since she had left, and yet, standing here now, it felt like she had never truly left at all. The house seemed to welcome her return, the air heavy with its ancient oppressive energy. Emma could almost feel the presence of the Watcher again, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the low hum of the malevolent force that lurked in every corner of this cursed place. She stood before the mansion for a moment, gathering her strength. She knew that whatever happened here, whatever truths she uncovered, it would change everything. She might never leave this place again. With a deep breath, Emma pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The air inside was cool, musty, but familiar. The house had a strange stillness to it, as though it had been waiting for her. She walked slowly, carefully, down the long, dimly lit hallway. The walls, once so menacing, now felt like they were holding their breath. as if waiting for something to happen. She paused before the grand staircase, where the mirror had once shown her the ghostly reflection of her ancestor, warning her of the danger to come. But the mirror was gone now, shattered, just as the watcher had been sealed. At least, that's what she had thought. A soft, almost imperceptible sound broke the silence, a whisper, like a breath in the dark. Emma spun around, her heart racing, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive stillness of the mansion. She took a step forward, but the floor creaked beneath her weight, as though the house itself was waking up. The shadows around her seemed to shift and stretch, as if reaching toward her. She could feel it, the Watcher's presence. It was here, watching her, and it would not let her leave. Emma stepped deeper into the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat. Each step echoed through the vast empty corridors, but there was a strange sensation in the air, like the house itself was breathing, waiting. The once familiar chill that had overwhelmed her now felt different, more alive. The soft whispering, just on the edge of her hearing, crept under her skin. It wasn't just the wind through the walls. It was something darker, something more intentional. "You can never leave," the voice seemed to say, repeating itself in low, guttural tones. "You were always meant to return." Emma shook her head, trying to dispel the creeping dread that threatened to cloud her thoughts. She couldn't let herself succumb to the fear again. She had faced the Watcher. She had survived. She had to stay strong. But the house wasn't going to make that easy. The shadows around her seemed to stretch, pulling closer as if they had a mind of their own. Her breath hitched when she realized she wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was moving just out of her sight. She spun around, but there was nothing there, only the darkened hallway stretching before her, its end lost in the distance. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. A biting cold swept through the air, and Emma could see her breath as she exhaled, a soft mist in the dim light. From behind her, the whispering grew louder, like voices chattering in a language she couldn't understand. She tried to ignore it, pushing forward, determined to uncover the truth of the mansion's cursed legacy. Her feet led her to the drawing room, the place where she had first encountered the strange, disembodied reflection. The room was shrouded in shadows now, but there was a faint, flickering light coming from within. Emma hesitated for a moment, her heart thumping loudly in her ears, but then, taking a deep breath, she crossed the threshold. The drawing room was eerily still, the once grand furniture covered in dusty sheets. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the air smelled of decay and old memories. But it was the mirror that drew Emma's attention. It wasn't the same mirror she had shattered during her confrontation with the Watcher, but a new one she hadn't noticed before. This one was long and narrow, its ornate frame twisted like the gnarled branches of a tree. The glass, however, was unsettlingly clear, as if it were calling to her. Before she could stop herself, Emma moved toward it. Her reflection greeted her with a cold, emotionless stare. But there was something else in the glass, something different. Her own reflection was no longer just her. In the corner of the mirror, she could see the faintest outline of a figure standing behind her, too shadowy to make out. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She turned sharply, expecting to find someone in the room with her, but there was nothing. The room remained as empty as it had been moments ago. The reflection, though, didn't lie. The figure behind her was still there, clearer now, its presence unnervingly tangible. It was the woman, the one who had visited her at her doorstep, the doppelganger. Emma gasped, her body frozen in place. The reflection of the woman grinned, her eyes narrowing as though she were waiting for something. "No," Emma whispered. "You can't be here. This is just a trick." The woman in the reflection didn't respond with words. Instead, she raised a hand and touched the glass. Emma could feel a cold shiver run down her spine as the image of the woman in the mirror mimicked her movement, reaching toward her as though the glass wasn't a barrier at all. A low rumbling sound filled the room, as if the house itself were groaning. Emma stumbled back, eyes wide with terror, but she couldn't look away from the mirror. Her reflection, once so familiar, was becoming distorted. The edges blurred, the features of the doppelganger blending with her own. The two faces merged, becoming one, a twisted version of herself, dark eyes gleaming with something sinister. "Stop," Emma whispered, but her voice was barely audible, drowned out by the suffocating presence in the room. The mirror flickered, and in an instant, the reflection vanished. Emma stood there, frozen, breathing heavily, her hands clammy as she stared at the empty mirror. The room felt wrong. It felt alive, as though the mansion itself had been watching her, testing her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her heart still racing, Emma forced herself to look away from the mirror, the lingering presence of the shadowy figure clawing at her senses. She had to find out what the watcher truly wanted, and she was certain that whatever answers she sought lay somewhere deep within the mansion's walls. The house was ancient, its architecture twisted with secrets. Every room, every hallway seemed to hide something that wasn't meant to be uncovered. But Emma had no choice. She had already crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back. She moved through the house with growing urgency, past rooms she had once thought empty, only to discover small, cryptic clues in unexpected places. A dusty tome hidden behind a bookshelf. Strange symbols carved into the wood of the floorboards. It was as though the mansion itself was calling to her, urging her to uncover the truth. Finally, after what felt like hours, she came upon a small door hidden behind a velvet curtain. It was a door she had never noticed before, a door that hadn't existed in the mansion's blueprints. Her breath caught as she approached it. This was it, the place where it all began. With trembling hands, Emma reached for the handle and opened the door. Inside, a small chamber awaited her. The room was circular, dimly lit by the flickering glow of several candles arranged in a wide circle. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of them familiar from her uncle's occult writings. In the center of the room was an altar, covered in an ornate cloth. Atop it was a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbol she had seen in the journals, the crescent moon surrounding the twisted tree. Emma's pulse quickened. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the box. Her hand reached out on instinct, but as her fingers brushed against the surface, the air seemed to change. The shadows in the room began to move again. They stretched toward her, as though they were alive, sentient. Something was awakening, and it was waiting for her. The moment Emma's hand touched the box, a strange vibration pulsed through the room, and the shadows around her seemed to writhe, coming to life with an energy she couldn't understand. It was like the mansion itself was breathing, alive, hungry, and thirsty for something. For a moment, Emma froze, her mind racing. What had she just unleashed? Then, a voice echoed in her mind, a voice that wasn't her own, but that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You cannot escape. The Watcher is yours to command now. You are the one who called it back." A terrible weight pressed down on her chest. The shadows seemed to tighten, closing in on her. "No," she gasped. "I didn't." But the voice continued, its tone dark, almost mocking. "You are the heir, Emma. The power you sealed was never meant to be locked away. You are the last of the Hawthorne line, and your blood is the key to everything. The Watcher will rise with you, and when it does, you will be its master." Emma stepped back, her mind reeling. The box, the symbols, the bloodline. All of it was part of the same dark tapestry. She had been chosen, not to fight the Watcher, but to control it, to wield it. The weight of her inheritance was crushing, and the price was far higher than she had ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. The Watcher had awakened, and Emma was the only one who could stop it, or unleash it. Emma stood before the altar, the wooden box still resting in her trembling hands, its weight heavier than ever. The shadows continued to slither across the walls, their presence growing more oppressive, more real. Every instinct in her screamed for her to close the box and run, to leave the mansion behind and escape this nightmare once and for all. But there was something in the air now, something ancient and undeniable. The Watcher was awake, and it was calling to her. She could feel its power resonating through the floor, through the very walls of the mansion, as if the house itself was alive with its malevolent energy. "You cannot escape," the voice had whispered, its tone both dark and triumphant. "You are its heir, Emma. You will bring it to life." Her head spun. The idea that she could control the Watcher was both terrifying and tantalizing. The mansion, her uncle's obsession, the strange dreams that had haunted her for years, they were all part of this. She was no longer just a victim of the curse. She was a player in this twisted game, whether she wanted to be or not. But what kind of power came at such a terrible cost? Emma took a step back, clutching the box tightly, her mind racing. Was this the legacy her uncle had left for her? Was she destined to be the one to unlock the Watcher, to wield its power? Or was this the final test, to see if she could resist it and destroy it once and for all? The box felt cold, almost alive in her hands. She opened it. Inside the box lay a small, ancient tome, its leather cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. The air around her seemed to thrum with anticipation as she carefully lifted it out, her hands shaking with the weight of what it represented. This was it. The book that held the final pieces of the puzzle. The knowledge that had been hidden from her for so long, and the key to understanding the Watcher's power. But the moment her fingers brushed against the pages, a surge of energy shot through her body, as though the book itself had come to life. Her vision blurred, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch, reaching for her with an insatiable hunger. She gasped, stumbling back, but she couldn't let go of the book. "Read it," the voice urged, its whisper filling her mind. "Read the truth, Emma. You will understand." With trembling hands, Emma opened the book. As her eyes scanned the first page, the words blurred before her. The symbols seemed to come alive, shifting and changing, pulling her deeper into the text. "The Watcher is not a mere creature," the text began, "but a force, a spirit bound to the earth through ancient rites. Its hunger is eternal, and its thirst for power insatiable. It feeds on bloodline, on the essence of its heirs, and only through the blood of the last hawthorn can it rise again." Emma's heart pounded. She could feel the truth of the words seeping into her mind, igniting something dark within her. She had always known there was something different about her family, something wrong. But this was beyond comprehension. "You are the last hawthorn," the voice whispered, louder now, as though it were standing behind her. "You are the key to its resurrection. The power of your blood is the gateway." The room seemed to darken, the shadows twisting into shapes, forms, eyes staring back at her from the corners of the room. Emma's skin crawled as she realized that the mansion itself had been built as a vessel, a prison for the Watcher, but also a place of power, a place where the ritual could one day be completed, and she was the last piece. The weight of her family's dark legacy crushed down on her like an avalanche. Emma's mind reeled, her stomach turning as she grappled with the horror of the truth. She had never asked for this. She had never wanted to be part of this cursed bloodline. But now, the power, the terrible power, was within her grasp. It would be so easy to embrace it, to wield the Watcher's might and take control. She could see it, the temptation, the promise of power, of control over her destiny. She could stop running. She could take the reins of her future. No more fear, no more helplessness. But then she remembered everything she had seen, the lives the Watcher had destroyed, the darkness it had consumed. The price of the power was far too high. If she allowed it to rise, it wouldn't just destroy her, it would destroy everything. A voice broke through her thoughts, raw and desperate. You can stop it. You must stop it. Emma spun around, her heart lurching. Standing in the doorway was her uncle, the man who had been lost to the mansion's curse, the man who had warned her about the Watcher. But he was different now. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, as though the mansion itself had drained the life from him. "Uncle," Emma breathed. How are you here?" Her uncle stepped forward, his presence barely more than a shadow in the dim light. "I never left, Emma. I was never truly gone. The Watcher keeps those who feed it. It took me, just as it will take you." Emma shook her head, confusion and fear mixing. I can't let that happen. I won't." "You don't understand," he interrupted, his voice hoarse. "You're not just part of this curse, Emma. You are the curse. The blood of the Hawthorne line will always bring it back. You can fight it, but you can never truly escape it. The Watcher will always find a way back." Emma's hands clenched around the book, her chest tight with the weight of his words. "Then how do I stop it?" she demanded. "What can I do?" Her uncle's hollow eyes met hers, filled with a deep, mournful regret. "You can't. Not alone. But there is a way to end it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's a ritual. The last of the bloodline must give themselves to the Watcher, willingly. Only then can its power be sealed away for good. Only then will it be gone forever." Emma's breath hitched. She couldn't breathe. The thought of giving herself to the Watcher, the thought of ending her own life, of sacrificing herself, was too much. It was a fate worse than death. "No," she whispered, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. Her uncle's face darkened with sorrow. "The Watcher will rise again, Emma. It will consume everything. Your legacy, your future, your soul. It will take it all, no matter what. But there is a way to stop it." Emma's mind spun with the enormity of what he was saying. She had never believed that she could sacrifice herself. But now, as she stood in the shadow of the Watcher's power, the weight of her choices felt unbearable. And then, through the fog of panic, something else emerged. A thought, a choice. There was one last option, one last way to fight this. Emma closed the book, her mind clearer now, the words burning in her mind. She didn't have to be the pawn. She could be the one to destroy the Watcher. Her uncle was right about one thing. She was part of this legacy. But she was not bound to it. She had always fought against her past. And now, in the face of the worst horror imaginable, she realized that the final victory wouldn't come from giving herself over. It would come from breaking the cycle. She turned to her uncle. "I'll end this," she said, her voice low and determined. Her uncle's eyes filled with sorrow, but there was something else there too, pride. Emma took one last long look at the mansion around her, the place that had been her prison and her battleground. It was time to end it, time to destroy the legacy, time to put the Watcher back into its cage, forever. With that thought, she stepped into the darkness, ready to face her destiny. Emma's steps echoed in the emptiness of the mansion as she made her way through the winding corridors, the dim light of the candles flickering weakly in the distance. The house seemed to pulse around her, as if it were alive, its heart beating in rhythm with her own. She had come to the end of this twisted road. There was no more running, no more avoiding the truth. The Watcher was here, in the very walls of this mansion, and it was time to confront it. The final ritual was drawing near, the ritual her uncle had spoken of. She could feel the weight of the choices she had made pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. Her mind spun as she replayed the words he had spoken, his warning ringing in her ears. You cannot escape. The Watcher will always find a way back. But she could escape. She had chosen to fight. She would not be a puppet in this cursed family legacy. Emma's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the book. She had studied it, poring over the cryptic passages, trying to make sense of the ritual her uncle had described. The only way to banish the Watcher for good was to sever the connection between the mansion, her bloodline, and the ancient entity that had haunted them for centuries. The price was high, but it was a price she was willing to pay. The door before her was massive, wrought iron and heavy, adorned with twisted designs that seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. It was the door she had never seen before, the door that had appeared only now, when she was ready to face what lay beyond. The heart of the mansion, the chamber where the Watcher had been imprisoned for generations. As she reached for the door handle, a cold wave of air rushed past her, the sound of whispers growing louder, clawing at her mind. The voices, its voices, called to her, urging her to turn back. Don't open the door, Emma. The whisper was insistent, pleading. You cannot win. The Watcher will consume you. But Emma didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The chamber was vast and cavernous, the walls lined with strange, intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and the floor beneath her feet was cold, smooth stone. At the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, and before it, a figure was kneeling in the shadows, bound in chains. The figure didn't move as Emma stepped inside. It was as though the room itself had been waiting for her. Her breath caught when she saw the figure's face. It was her uncle. But it wasn't the man she remembered. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were hollow, empty sockets of dark despair. He looked up at her as she approached, his mouth twitching into a grim smile. You've come? He said, his voice raspy and weak, barely above a whisper. Uncle, Emma breathed. What happened to you? His smile faded. It was always going to happen, he said softly. I never had a choice. Neither do you. The Watcher is part of us. It's always been part of the Hawthorne bloodline. Emma's eyes searched the room, taking in the symbols, the altar, and the strange energy that seemed to crackle in the air. The Watcher was here. It had been waiting for this moment. For her. What do I do? She asked, her voice trembling. Her uncle's gaze softened, and for a moment, Emma saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who had once cared for her. The ritual is simple, Emma. You must offer yourself to the Watcher, willingly. Your bloodline, your essence, will be the key to its final release. Only then will it be bound for good. A deep, resonant rumble shook the room, and the shadows seemed to writhe as though the Watcher were waking from a long slumber. No, Emma whispered, stepping back. I won't do it. Her uncle's face twisted with sorrow. Then you will die with us, trapped in this place. The Watcher will never be sealed away. It will consume you, just as it has consumed me. Emma felt the air shift. The shadows grew darker, the whispers louder, and the presence of the Watcher became tangible, pressing down on her like a weight she could not escape. The floor seemed to tremble beneath her feet, and the very walls of the chamber seemed to close in, as if the house itself was alive. hungry for her. But Emma didn't give in. She couldn't. She glanced down at the book in her hands. The pages were glowing faintly now, and the symbols on the altar began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She stepped forward, determination flooding her veins. There was another way. She had to trust in it. The room was thick with dark energy. Every breath Emma took felt like she was inhaling the very essence of the Watcher itself. The whispers were all around her now, pressing against her mind, urging her to give in. But Emma stood firm. Her uncle's eyes followed her movements, his face lined with both fear and resignation. "You don't understand, Emma. You can't stop it. The Watcher is a force of nature. It will never be sealed away without a sacrifice." The stone altar seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The symbols on the walls flickered as if alive. A deep, guttural growl emanated from the shadows, a sound that made Emma's skin crawl, but she didn't flinch. "Maybe the Watcher can be stopped," Emma said, her voice firm and strong, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Maybe not through blood, but through choice. The Hawthorne family was cursed because we let fear control us. We let it dictate our lives, but it ends now." Her uncle's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're choosing to die?" Emma shook her head, stepping forward, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm choosing to live. I'm choosing to break the cycle." The shadows in the room surged violently, as though the Watcher was about to strike, to crush her where she stood. But Emma did not falter. She reached out, placing the book on the altar. The moment her hands touched the cold stone, a flash of light illuminated the room, blinding her. The light exploded outward in a burst of energy that tore through the chamber like a storm. The symbols on the walls flared with light, and the rumbling grew louder, the Watcher's growls more desperate. Emma closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength she had left, focusing all her energy into one final act of defiance. She breathed, and with that breath, the mansion trembled violently. The shadows screeched as if in pain, and a wave of darkness swept through the room, surging toward her, trying to engulf her. But Emma did not give in. In that final moment, with the energy of her bloodline flowing through her, she made her choice. The Watcher screamed, its power shattering as the ritual took hold. The mansion itself seemed to breathe one final deafening sigh before it collapsed in on itself. The shadows dissipated, the darkness lifted, and Emma felt the weight of centuries of terror evaporate. When Emma opened her eyes again, the chamber was silent. The Watcher was gone. The mansion, once oppressive and alive with dark energy, was now still. The walls, once twisted with shadows, were now calm, their oppressive weight gone. The air no longer felt heavy, and the whispers had ceased. Her uncle was gone too. His figure had vanished, the chains that once bound him, now reduced to dust. The last trace of the Watcher's hold over him was gone. She had done it. She had broken the curse. Emma collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her body trembling from the effort. But she was free. The mansion was free. And with that freedom came the realization that her life was no longer bound by the horrors of the past. She could finally live. She stood slowly, wiping the sweat from her brow, and looked around at the now quiet chamber. It was over. The Watcher was no more.